Have you been called to be a missionary? Have you heard God's call in your life to go overseas or to go to the unreached peoples of the earth, but you worry about how you'll provide for your family. You worry about how God will take care of you in the strange kind of diseases that you may run across there, or snakes, or all the different dangerous things that we might find in the mission field. Well, I have a story for you. So Abel was a Christian when I came to his village. But as I started teaching in their village, I specifically started teaching about how every Christian's responsibility is to make disciples of the world. It's not just for professional pastors or missionaries, but all Christians are called to participate in this work. And as I taught, Abel felt convicted that he also was called to be a missionary to his own people group, but farther up in the mountains where there were no Christians and they had no exposure, no way to learn about Christianity, about Jesus, the places where it's truly unreached. But Abel was worried about how he would provide for his family. There are no schools up in the area where he felt called to be a missionary. He worried about how he would be able to educate his kids. There was no financial support for him. He would need to be a tent-making missionary. He would need to, have his own farm, have his own mountain farm, and work as he is working as a missionary as well. And he was worried that he wouldn't have enough food to provide for his family. And his oldest daughter had a medical condition. She had had spinal TB in the past and was still quite weak. And he was worried, up there in the mountains when a hurricane blows through, the rivers get really high and he might not be able to get his daughter to a hospital for days or even weeks. And so for a while he really hesitated about whether he should be a missionary or not. And it was during this time that Abel's house started to collapse. It's very common where we live, up in the mountains here, where houses are primarily made out of wood and bamboo and grass. But in his particular place, their problem, they had plenty of bamboo and wood, but they didn't have anything to roof with. And so when Abel had cleared his mountain farm that year, he had left one palm tree. It's a specific kind of palm tree that has a really broad leaf that they can use for roofing. So that particular day, Abel tied on his machete and started up to his field. And when he got there, he went over to the edge of his field to where there's a tall stand of bamboo. He cut down the tallest one he could find, cut off each of the branches about this long. And if you've ever worked with bamboo, or this kind of bamboo, at least Hawaiian we call it, the branches are kind of stair-stepped. And so what he did is he dragged that bamboo over to the palm tree, and he, with almost superhuman strength, it's really heavy, managed to get it standing upright and leaned against the tree. And he tied the base down to the tree, and he started to climb up those branches. He used it as a ladder to get up to the top of this tree, because these palm trees don't have any branches until all the way at the very top, about 40 to 50 feet up in the air. And so Abel started climbing up the ladder that he had made, the bamboo ladder, and that's when he ran into his first problem, because the piece of bamboo, he had chosen the longest one he could find, but the piece of bamboo he had was still just a few inches short of the first branch. It's actually a leaf, the first stem of the leaf. But Abel really, really wanted to get these leaves. There was no other, good roofing leaves around. They had all been harvested. This is the last tree that was left. And so standing on his very tiptoes, he reached as high as he could and just barely couldn't quite reach it. And standing at the very top, the top of the bamboo was very small and was moving around, so it was not a very stable place to stand. But he really wanted it, so he prayed to God and then jumped and grabbed onto that first branch. He didn't know if that first leaf was rotten, if it would collapse under him. They also have thorns about this long, and so he didn't know what would happen. But by God's grace, the leaf was strong. He just got his hands cut up a little bit and managed to climb up into the tree. And he started cutting down the leaves of that tree to use as roofing. And that's when he ran into a second problem. Because remember I said that he had tied the base of the bamboo? Well, he hadn't brought anything with him to tie the top of his bamboo ladder. So he's up there in the tree cutting these leaves off, and as he's cutting, one of them falls over on the side where his ladder was and caught on one of those branches sticking out from the bamboo and pulled his whole bamboo ladder over. He had no way to get back down again. So he continued working. He started shouting, started hollering for help, continued working until he got all the branches cut off, all the leaves cut off, and still no one had come by. So he started hollering and shouting, sitting there up there in the top of the tree. And way off in the distance, he could see a little bit of smoke drifting up out of the jungle. And so he started hollering that way, "Help, help, help!" But nobody came. Abel had purposely chosen his mountain farm to be a long ways away so that thieves would have a hard time going and stealing his crops. The sun started to go down, and he still hadn't found anybody. Still nobody had come by to rescue him. And Abel started thinking, he had cut all the leaves and all the branches off this tree. There was nothing left except a little stump at the top of the tree. He started thinking, there's no way I'm going to make it through the night. If I try to stay up here, I'm for sure gonna fall asleep, and I'll drift off and fall out of this tree in the middle of the night, and without any control. He said, it's better if I just try to jump now while there's still a little bit of daylight. So he threw his machete down first, far away, so that he wouldn't fall on that. And then he said a prayer to God, asking that if it was God's will to save his life. And then before he could lose his courage, Abel jumped out of that tree. Remember I said it's 40 to 50 feet high, right? Well, that's when Abel ran into his third problem. Because he was so scared that he jumped, before he could lose his courage, he jumped without looking on which side of the tree he jumped. Well, there had been a stand of bamboo, a little tiny bamboo they used for fencing, right next to the tree, and without realizing it, Abel had jumped right on that side of the tree. Well, he had cut down all of those bamboo, but all of the bases of the bamboo were sticking up out of the ground, and you always cut bamboo at an angle, so it's very, very sharp. It's like they're like 300 or 400 knives sticking up out of the ground right where Abel was falling. Abel didn't have time to pray a big, long, fancy theological prayer. All he had time to do was shout, "Father!" and his feet hit the ground. And immediately he started feeling like, are my feet hurt? Am I cut up? He looked down at his feet and he didn't see any blood. So kind of gingerly he picked up his feet and got out of the bamboo and started looking. He didn't even have a scratch on his feet. And I have friends that work in emergency medicine. They say that if you fall from a really high distance and land on your feet first, that a lot of times your bones will just shatter all the way up your body. But not a single one of Abel's bones was broken. And I want to tell you that Abel no longer doubted whether God would take care of him in the mission field. He and his wife and his 3 kids at that time, just a few months later, packed up all their belongings and moved to the village of Pusog, where they have been church planting ever since. And now they're in the process, a church has been planted there in Pusog, and they're in the process of training the leaders in Pusog to go plant another church farther up in the mountains, a granddaughter church. So once again, my friends, maybe you also have felt called of God, like Abel did, to be a missionary. But maybe you worry about being responsible, about providing for your family, about how to educate your family. If your kids will grow up in a good environment and will be socially adjusted, or all the different things that we worry about as parents and as leaders of our family. I want to encourage you to remember Abel, to remember that if God calls you to this work, then He'll provide. He'll take care of you. He knows what you need, and He'll make it happen. So please don't let anything stand between you and God's call to get involved in His mission.